Hello and welcome to another episode of the Gritty Hour. I have a very special guest here tonight, a returning guest. I have Larry Jorgensen, who we had on, I don't know, about a year and a half ago or so. Uh, he wrote a book called The Coca Cola Trail, which is still a very popular book. And we have him back here because he has a brand new book out, which is with an intriguing story behind it, called Shipwrecked and Rescued, the City of Bangor. Welcome back to the Gritty Hour, Larry. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Tom. It's great to be back on the Gritty Hour, and we have a new story to tell.
Yes, and this is an intriguing one, and I have your book. I'll show it to the folks. I do have it right here. So tell us a little bit about it. I know you
Well,
mentioned it. I'm sorry. I know you mentioned it when we had you on. You were in the process of doing the research for it, and now here it is come to fruition. So tell us a little bit about it.
well, it was a story that I discovered when I was vacationing up in Upper Peninsula, Michigan, and I first heard about it, and I thought it's never been told before. And I went to the maps, the shipwreck maps of Lake Superior and so forth. It's not on there. And
Uh-huh.
I thought this is unbelievable. So I started gathering information from various sources, relatives of people who were involved, and historic associations and so forth. And I just got addicted to the story
Right.
because it is so fantastic to have a ship loaded with 240 Chryslers get wrecked on a reef, and they're able not only to finally save the crew, but ultimately to rescue, if that's the proper term, the cars as well. So it was just to me it was fascinating, and the people who are on that Keweenaw Peninsula um, had not, it was kind of locally known, but it had not been really circulated throughout the area. And there were a lot of people that said, gee, I'm glad somebody finally got all the facts on this and put it together. And that's what we did.
Yeah, and the basis of the rescue is not only, as you say, was it 23 ship's crewmen? 23, I think was the number.
That's correct, right?
But there was well over 100 Chrysler cars. This is 1926, by the way. And I was going to ask you, was it the Chrysler Imperial or the Chrysler Whippet? I know they came out with two that year.
Well, no, it was what they call the Model 50.
Oh,
Uh,
Model 50. Okay.
and that was, sort of their mid-range sedan. The Whippet, by the way, there were 6 Whippets on that ship. But
Uh-huh.
by that time, the Whippet was being produced in Toledo by the Willis Corporation. And for whatever reason, 6 of them were on that ship as well. But the bulk of them, which started out 240 Chryslers from Detroit, um, they did lose 13 into Lake Superior, but the rest of them ultimately were rescued from the abandoned and wrecked ship.
Yeah. I had earmarked a photo because, first of all, you did a lot of exhaustive research in this, and I don't know how you found. There's a lot of photos in this book. Uh, I don't know how you found all of them.
Well, some of the photos we can thank the captain of the Coast Guard rescue ship because he was an amateur photographer. And I guess, like me, he became addicted to the story. And even after the crew was rescued, he stayed with it with his camera for those months afterwards, and took a lot of the photos of the cars coming off the boat, ultimately finally getting to shore and being gathered together, 200 and some of them, in the little town of Copper Harbor. So a lot of those photos came from descendants of his family who were gracious enough to share them. And in fact, some of them do reside in a museum up there in the Keweenaw Peninsula. So
Mhm.
that helped. And then it was just a lot of digging, going to historical associations and friends. For example, there was a a copy of a Christmas card in there that I actually was able to obtain from the granddaughter of the family that saved the crew members after they were finally brought in to thaw out.
Uh-huh.
And this this document, this Christmas card, had been buried in the grandmother's records. And in interviewing the granddaughter, she said, "I think I found something of interest." Well, it was tremendously of interest because it was the first mate of the ship who finally, after being rescued and finally able to get out of the hospital and return home, sent this Christmas card to the family expressing great gratitude for saving all of the fellow crewmen. And
Right.
that's the type of thing that we found in looking and in interviewing people, to put all the pieces together into one story.
Right. Actually, I should have mentioned the name of the ship which sunk was the City of Bangor.
Right.
And which lake was it in? Lake Superior?
Lake Superior.
Right.
And the reason it was called the City of Bangor, when the ship was originally built, the gentleman who paid for the construction of it was from Bangor, Maine.
Uh-huh.
And he thought appropriate to name it after his hometown, even though he was living in Michigan at that time.
Now, when you were doing the research, when you did the Coca Cola Trail, the history of the Coca Cola Company, you were mainly down in Georgia, I'm assuming, in the Atlanta area for most of your
No,
research.
no, actually, we went pretty much all over the country. Of course, a lot of it is the southern half of the United States because that's where Coca-Cola started first. But we've got a story in there from California. Yeah, there are a lot of chapters with Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. I mean, Coca-Cola was first bottled in Vicksburg, Mississippi, not in
Right.
Atlanta, Georgia.
Right.
So you go where the story takes you, and
Right.
in this case, it took me up and down the fabulous Keweenaw Peninsula of Lake Superior.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So you had to head up to Michigan for the research on this book.
Right,
Yeah.
and in the summertime, it's a great place to be.
Yeah, that's a good, smart move to do it in the summertime.
As we tell the tale in the book, in the wintertime, November is when the boat crashed.
Hmm.
And November is the worst month. It's recorded to be the worst month on Lake Superior. November is the month when the Edmund Fitzgerald went down.
Right.
Fortunately, we have a happy ending to our story, and it's true. And it's an amazing rescue.
Right.
The crew members were able, see, the ship crashed on a reef off of the shore of Copper Harbor, the Keweenaw Peninsula. Well, the crew members were able to take a lifeboat, and by pushing the boat back and forth to the ship, they were finally able to get all of the crewmen on dry land, dry as in covered with 4 feet of snow.
Right. Right.
The problem, Tom, is that the captain, during the big blizzard that took them astray, thought they had traveled west of the little community of Copper Harbor. There's a mountain called Brockway Mountain. He thought through the storm he saw Brockway Mountain, which is west of Copper Harbor.
Right.
Well, as we show in the book, the ship actually crashed east of Copper Harbor.
Hmm.
So when the crewmen got off, they mistakenly thought they were west, and what they should do is head east to get to Copper Harbor.
Hmm.
They wandered around for 2 days, almost freezing to death, before they were finally rescued and taken by the Coast Guard into Copper Harbor.
Yeah. Now, as you mentioned earlier, they had to thaw her out. I'm sure they were frozen solid by then, but did the folks in Copper Harbor take them in?
Yeah, ironically, there were actually 2 crews rescued. The Coast Guard boat had gone out originally to rescue a crew from a ship that was grounded, but wasn't in that bad a shape. But he got that crew, and it was coming in that he saw the abandoned Bangor, and ultimately noticed where the lost crew was. They were almost frozen to death. It had been 2 days, and they were not dressed for the weather, and there was no communication, so no one knew they were shipwrecked.
Hmm.
He finally was able to go back and get them and bring them to the little town of Copper Harbor. Well, now we've got 50 some stranded crewmen in a little bitty town, and the one family said, "We will take the crew in from the Bangor." And the crew was literally almost frozen to death. They weren't dressed for it. Some of them had Oxford shoes on. They finally got them into the house, and Copper Harbor at that time of year is isolated. The road is not plowed. It's like 40 miles to the nearest town. So they're isolated. And fortunately, the gentleman of the house, the husband, had slaughtered 2 hogs to prepare for the oncoming winter. So they had that. They had a cow. They described it as a well-producing cow and some chickens. So the wife and the husband and the children begin to prepare food and to get these crewmen into the house, thaw them out, and ultimately get them transported by a very unique snowmobile and by sleighs to the closest hospital, which was 40 miles away.
Wow.
But, but if it wouldn't have been for that family, and it took several days to get all this accomplished, feeding them, taking care of them without knowing if their food supplies would ever be replenished for
Right.
the winter, they went ahead and really saved all 23 members of that crew.
Well, about how big of a town, population-wise, was Copper Harbor back in
I
1920?
would imagine at that time it couldn't have been more than 3 dozen people
Oh,
that,
really? Okay.
that were brave enough to live there at that time.
Yeah.
Even now, when I go up there in the summer, I enjoy the area. The full-time population of Copper Harbor is probably a couple hundred.
Wow.
And the road that goes, Copper Harbor is right on the tip of that peninsula. The road that goes to the nearest town of any size is 40 miles long. Like I said, it was not plowed. They had to get 2 highway crews and a special plow to work for 3 weeks to get that road open,
Hmm.
because now you've got 200 and some Chryslers lined up in the little town of Copper Harbor.
Hmm.
What are you going to do with them?
Right.
Well, Mr. Walter Chrysler says, "I want my cars back."
Right.
Okay.
Right. He doesn't
So
care
he,
how much snow's out there.
he paid a salvage company to get the cars off the boat. And the photos of doing that are fantastic.
Yeah.
And then once they got them off the boat onto the reef that the boat had crashed on. Now they had to wait 3 months to do that for the ice to form around the reef. So
Mm.
there would be solid ice there. And the original idea, well, we'll drive the cars to land, we'll build a road. That didn't work. They couldn't build a road through the snow. Somebody said, "Wait a minute, the ice is frozen along the lake. We'll drive them along the shore of the lake to Copper Harbor."
Hmm.
Sounds simple, but it wasn't,
Hmm.
because some of the cars didn't have batteries. Some of them that did have batteries, it didn't work.
Yeah.
Okay. So they would drive the cars that would work along the shore of Lake Superior to Copper Harbor, take the batteries out, go back and get another batch of cars. And this, it took a few days to get all 200 and some of the 1927 Chryslers into Copper Harbor.
Wow.
But
Now,
no,
did he didn't get personally involved, right? Walter Chrysler.
only from the standpoint of, after the insurance agent went out there and declared the ship a total loss, Walter Chrysler did come up to the peninsula and go out and have a look for himself, and agreed, yes, it was a total loss.
Mm.
And that's when they initiated this plan to salvage the cars, brought in a salvage operation from Duluth, Minnesota, to get it done. But so now you've got 200 and some cars sitting in a little bitty town 40 miles away from any kind of civilization at all. And the idea was to get the cars to that little town of Calumet, where there was a railroad depot,
Mm.
to get the cars down there, to get them loaded on a train, flat cars on a train, get them back to Detroit.
Mm.
Well, first of all, they had to open the roads. Then, what about fuel? In the meantime, they're hauling gas by sleigh and tanks up the Copper Harbor to gas up the cars.
Wow.
So you've got 200 cars. Finally, they get the road open. Now what? The salvage company says, tell you what, we will pay $5 a person to drive a car from Copper Harbor to Calumet. So that was the deal. A lot of high school boys took off that day to go up to Copper Harbor and drive a car.
Mm.
So it gets a little more interesting, and we get into this part of the book too. If you're driving a brand new Chrysler and you're going to get $5 to drive it to the depot, and as you get closer to the depot, besides this one little road, there are a few side roads. Well, some of the cars didn't quite make it to the depot. We don't know how many, but we're sure a few of them didn't make it.
Mm.
One in particular, we talk about in the book. We were able to track it. It stayed on the Keweenaw Peninsula for 69 years. It went from one family just to the next member of the family and so forth. The car had 200,000 miles on it.
Gee.
When it finally ended up in a museum along the Lake Superior shoreline, the Eagle Harbor Lighthouse Museum.
Mm-hmm.
And the history of that car is absolutely fantastic.
When you think about it, sure.
And there have been stories about others that have shown up, but what about the six Whippets? You know, Chrysler was paying, or his insurance company, to get the cars back to Detroit. They really didn't have any desire to get the Whippets back. You know, it was not their car. There were six Whippets. We have been able to definitely track down three. One of them, there's a picture of in the book that was kept underneath a shed, and the shed started falling down, and it was finally sold off. Another one, a lady who was very active in the Historical Association, when she was young, bought the second Whippet from an estate sale. And she's got pictures of it and will attest to that. A third one must have existed because in the old hotel in downtown Calumet, the wooden wheels from a Whippet are displayed proudly in that hotel.
Wow.
So we know there's three of them for sure.
Mm-hmm.
The other three probably ended up in the junkyard somewhere.
And one of those kids that took off for school, it ended up in his garage, his father's garage. Yeah.
So the whole thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say the whole thing is really a tribute to the people in that peninsula, how they all got involved. He had two highway crews out there in the dead of winter plowing through 4 to 8 feet of snow. You had people pitching in to drive cars. You had people pitching in to save the crew. It's amazing. This little bitty peninsula,
Mm-hmm.
you know, sparsely populated. You know, they say it takes a village. Well, in this story, it took a peninsula. You know,
Not to mention the good work of the Coast Guard at the time.
that's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
Now, what was the original destination of the city of Bangor, the ship?
Well, it was actually headed to Duluth.
Oh,
And
Minnesota. Okay.
so it made it about halfway, and it got into a storm and this is interesting too, because originally the Bangor was made as a cargo ship to haul things like iron ore. So it would ride lower in the water.
Right.
Well, when it was loaded with cars, it was higher in the water. Consequently, when this big storm hit it, and the captain said he'd never seen a storm like that on Lake Superior, it just literally tossed that ship sideways and up and down, and they lost control of it completely, lost the rudder.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it was because the ship was riding higher than normal because it had a lighter cargo.
Right. And you think that's why it scraped well, it didn't run aground. It actually scraped part of the peninsula, I'm thinking, right?
Well, yeah, that reef, it threw it so high, the storm threw it so high onto that reef that it just gashed the part of the ship that was, above water,
Hmm.
and again floating higher than normal. And it just, there was one plan. One of the early salvage companies that took a look at it said, "Oh, we'll float it. We'll get it off the reef and we'll float it." And they actually started pumping water out of it, but the boat was so high on the reef. Once they tried to get it off the reef, the tugs couldn't get close enough to pull it off. And the ship actually stayed on that reef for 18 years.
Wow.
It became a tourist attraction. People would walk out there and they could see it from shore. What ultimately led to it being salvaged off of the reef was a thing that we all know called World War II.
Hmm.
And there was a need for steel. And another salvage company with a little bit more modern technology 18 years later said, "We want to salvage it. We want the rights to salvage it." And they took, welding, cutting torches and dynamite and whatever, and they actually cut it down to the water line and salvaged a lot of the steel
Right.
for the war.
Wow.
There was a secondary, I call it a midnight salvage crew, uh, unauthorized, but it was two lumberjacks who had been in the woods cutting down trees, and they heard what was going on, and they knew there was still some of the boat underwater out there, and they thought, if we salvage what's left of that, we'll make a lot more money than cutting down these trees. So they devised this big truck with a big crane on the back of it. There's a picture in the book, and they were able to work their way out close to the reef, and they went underneath the water. They used dynamite, whatever they could, to cutting torches to break up what was left of the ship, and use that winch on that crane that they had on the back of that truck, and haul the rest of the pieces to shore and salvage them.
Wow.
There is still to this day pieces that, because of change of tides, of sand washing away or whatever, occasionally will show up small pieces, 2-3 feet. And in the museum where the one Chrysler is on display, there is also some pieces that have recently turned up of the ship, small pieces. In addition, the captain of the Bangor, his desk is in the museum.
Mm.
Apparently, he was able to salvage his desk. He gave it to the family that saved his crew as sort of a gift, and the family has since donated to the museum along with the captain's jacket. So,
Right.
so there's a lot of memorabilia up there too.
Sure. Well, it's very interesting. So you think none of the ship or any of the cars sank?
Yeah, 13 cars did.
Oh, it did. Okay.
What happened
Yeah.
when the ship got into this tossing and turning? The cars were on deck and below deck.
Hmm.
Well, the cars on deck were chained together. It would be a chain of 13 of them side by side. One chain, and then the cars were hooked to each one linked to that one chain.
Right.
Well, the chain that was closest to the outside of the ship broke during that tossing and turning, and the 13 cars that were connected to that chain went overboard.
Ah.
They are still sitting on the bottom of Lake Superior
Well,
somewhere.
that's what I was going to ask you, Larry. Do you know of anybody that ever tried to go down there and dive down there and take a look?
I've had divers tell me they've looked for them and haven't been able to find them, but we know they're out there someplace. Because
Yeah.
when that storm hit, they were way out into Lake Superior,
Okay.
and who knows exactly where they are.
Yeah,
You
it's a
know,
deep. I don't know how deep, but it's a deep
oh,
lake.
Lake Superior is the deepest and the biggest and the meanest lake of the Great Lakes.
Right.
In the back of my book, I do a chapter about a sister ship to the Bangor, which 2 years after the Bangor crashed, this particular ship was in Lake Michigan and was carrying a shipload of Nash automobiles from Kenosha, Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
And it tangled with an ore carrier coming north in a bad storm, and that ship, which was called the Sentinel, quickly went to the bottom of Lake Michigan. Unfortunately, it took the captain and 5 crewmen with it.
Oh,
Um, to this day, there is this accumulation of Nash ramblers and what's left of the ship on the bottom of Lake Michigan.
wow. What year was that?
That would have, well, the Bangor crashed in 26, so that would have been 1928.
Okay.
And the the area has been referred to as the largest Nash museum in the world. And the area, what they're doing, they are declaring certain areas in the lakes where there are a lot of shipwrecks that have gone down. They're declaring protected areas. So you can't go down and salvage anything from these protected areas. And that Nash ship is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, as in the Edmund Fitzgerald. One of the gentlemen that helped me with the book, doing some research, he had actually been able to talk to a couple of the crewmen in their later years, but he's a diver. And he has gone down to the Edmund Fitzgerald and seen exactly how the ship was split in half, and there are still remains of the crew down there and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
It's a protected area.
Yeah.
So
Well,
there's
yeah, it's their burial ground, really. It
exactly
has
that's
to be
exactly
some.
right.
That's it's the exhaustive research you did for this book, combined with your natural writing talent, makes this very potent. It's a very interesting story, and you do have a gift. Going back to the Coca Cola Trail books, the compendium, the two Coca Cola books, you do have a gift for keeping alive some of these stories that otherwise would have fallen by the wayside from memory.
I think just like the story of the ship and
Hmm.
of the Coca Cola Trail places, you find them and you find them so interesting, and the fact that nothing's been done about it. I guess I'm an old news dog, Tom, and
Hmm.
it stirs me up, and I want to get the story and preserve it. You
Yeah,
know, it's just I guess they talk about a Dalmatian dog on a fire truck, still wants to go when the bell rings. Well, that's an old news dog, still wants to go when there's a story to be told.
yeah, that's a great gift to have, and you do tell a great story. And this particular one it's almost unbelievable how it all came together. Small community. I guess the other community. How do you say the name of the other town?
Well, Calumet was the one,
Calumet.
yeah, where there's 2 towns right together. There's Calumet and Lorium. They're like sister towns. Lorium is where the hospital was, where they were able to take the crew by sleigh, and there was one sort of crudely built snowmobile made out of a Model T, but they finally got them all to that hospital. And Calumet is a sister town. They're right together. Um, so it's an
And
interesting part of Upper Michigan.
as you said before, it's about give or take about 40 miles from Copper Harbor.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's in the summertime, and I guess if you're a snowmobiler in the wintertime, it's a great place to be.
Right. Well, it's probably a much better place to be, or safer place to be in August rather than November. Yeah.
So, they
So
get in the wintertime, they will get over 300 inches of snow up there,
holy mackerel.
and it's because that peninsula sits out into Lake Superior.
Hmm.
They get what you call lake effect snow, which a system will form over Lake Superior, and it doesn't go away, and it keeps dumping snow and dumping snow.
Sure, sure.
Well, it just adds to the pleasure or the misery, depending on what you like.
Yeah, I tilt toward the misery. Well, we get that here in New York too, in around the Buffalo area,
Oh
uh,
yes,
from Lake
I've
Erie. You know.
I've been through Buffalo in the wintertime on a we used to do competitive snowmobile racing,
Ah,
and there was always a couple big ones out in New York. Malone was one of them, and Boonville, and we'd go through Buffalo, and I could remember trips through Buffalo where you're just hoping you're going to make it with your car and your big trailer behind you.
yeah. Well, fortunately for me personally, it's about 10 hours away from where I live. So, New York is a big state, as you probably know.
Oh
So,
yeah,
yeah. So I'm just gonna remind people, and I'm gonna link to the previous podcast you were on about the Coca Cola Trail. I don't know if you can see that on your side. This is the Amazon page. So this one here, can you see that?
sure can.
This one here came out in 2017, and then you came out. This one is still popular. We're saying before we started recording, if you want to tell, there's one place where they go through dozens and dozens and dozens of them. A tourist stop that people stop in.
Yeah, there's if you're in fact, I've had people tell me that they bought the book to use as a guide on their summer vacation. Not
Oh,
to hit all the places, but there's some of them. But yeah, the one place we're talking about, Highway 66, is
ah,
a very popular tourist route, and
yes,
there are several tourist stores on 66 that have the Coca-Cola Trail. But I think the most interesting one is near the town of Arcadia, where there's a place called the Soda Ranch. You can't miss it. There's a huge lit soda bottle. It must be 20 feet high outside of this place. And when you go inside, I mean, it's Coca Cola and other memorabilia. And a lot of people have stopped there and have bought the book. And I'm very appreciative of that.
yeah. What state is that in?
Well, that would be in Oklahoma.
Oklahoma. Okay. Well, you can get your kicks on Route 66 and also the Coca Cola Trail if you happen to be doing the Route 66 vacation this summer. Stop it.
Both of the books, Tom, do have their own website.
Yeah,
And it's simple, Coca-Cola Trail.com and Shipwrecked and Rescued.com.
right.
And yeah, they're available on Amazon, but if you go to the website, I'll even sign them for you.
Oh, there you go. As you were gracious enough to send me one. I had earmarked I wanted to show people the actual enormity of the cars. They had them, but actually the best photo of it is right on the back cover. So I'm just going to show that. I don't know if you can see that from your end there. Am I holding that up right?
You've got it. And
Okay.
that's all the cars when they finally got them to Copper Harbor. They ran them along Lake Superior along the shoreline, and
But from this photo on, they still had to make it to where the railroad depot was,
right,
which is
right.
about, what'd you say, 40 miles from here?
40 miles. And
Yeah.
it took, see, that was the shipwreck was in November, and they couldn't even start getting the cars off the boat until January. They had to wait that long for the ice to freeze and to get them off the boat, off the reef, and into Copper Harbor.
So Walter Chrysler got most of them back anyway.
Yeah, he got enough.
Yeah, he got them back to Detroit and then just sold them. I guess he just sold them.
I I think in those days that was no problem at all. I don't know if you could do that now, but in those days especially the ones that were underneath, on the lower deck, they were pretty good shape. They're protected. The ones on top of the deck, and you see the pictures in the book. I mean, they were covered with snow and ice.
Hmm.
Uh, the one car that's in the museum up in Eagle Harbor, uh, you'll see a picture in the book where the maritime historian there is pointing to a spot on that car where there's an axe mark from where they cut the ice off the car to help get it off the boat.
Oh
But
yeah,
some of the cars were completely covered with snow and ice.
yeah, and I'm sure they had to be touched up in Detroit before they were reshipped out.
Right.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the people in Duluth had to do a little walking that year, and they never got their delivery, you know. So, just curious where they actually ended up, you know,
It,
where they actually ended up, you know.
it would be, and I've tried, I've done some things on the internet to try to see if anybody has a 1927 Chrysler that they think might have been on the Bangor.
Yeah,
Chances are, if they do have one, or if they did have one, probably the garage that sold it to them didn't tell them it had been in a shipwreck, you know.
right. They probably well, the garage that sold it to them probably didn't even know. Once it
But
got back to
you're
Detroit,
right on that, Tom.
they might have had to touch the paint up a little bit, or check the electronics, and then shipped it right back out. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a great story. I do appreciate you coming back. Um, but I have to ask you, Larry, what's piquing your interest now?
Well,
You might come back for a
fortunately,
trifecta.
I am into another book. And again, I guess I've gotten addicted now to snow because I'm writing a book called Make It Go in the Snow: People and Ideas in the History of Snowmobiles. Now, we're not talking about the snowmobiles you see today, where, very fast and very sleek, but we're talking about how was how did we do transportation in the snow back in the early 1900s?
Right.
For example, the word snowmobile was actually copyrighted in 1917,
Uh-huh.
and we have a chapter that explains what it was. It was in fact the Ford Model T with the attachment on it that what became the snowmobile.
Like
So
like skis instead of tires or something?
trees in front and chains on the wheel, this track on the wheel and back.
Uh-huh.
So we have things like that. We've got a story about a gentleman who in 1911 built a snowmobile in his basement in Chicago, Illinois. So this is the kind of stuff. There was a period where air power propellers became used to propel vehicles through the snow. And there are many places and many companies that did that, and that's in the book. And just those type of stories that very fascinating.
It's funny. I was thinking when you talk about snowmobiles, you did mention one was like a makeshift snowmobile back into the Shipwrecked and Rescued story. Um, Nobody used bobsleds back then, right? Or dog sleds.
No, the only way they had to go was either snowshoe or this one automobile dealer in Calumet
Uh-huh.
had been experimenting with the same concept of putting the tracks on the back of the wheels, the
Hmm.
skis up front, and it worked. He was the one, in fact, when the Coast Guard, after they got everybody rescued, the Coast Guard captain called the hospital in Lorium and said, "We've got some people that are really badly hurt. We need help as quick as possible." Well, the doctor at the hospital knew that this particular auto dealer had been playing with this idea
Hmm.
of a snowmobile, so to speak, and he got a hold of him, and that doctor was taken out to provide some medical assistance immediately for the
Right.
ones that were in the worst condition.
Right. Some immediate first aid. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
some of them were taken to the hospital with that vehicle, but most of them were transported to the hospital by sleigh, horse-drawn sleigh.
Right. So now this gives you an excuse with the research you have to do for this upcoming book to go back to Michigan in the summer, go back to
That's true.
Calumet, and
And
find
and
out about this guy that was toying with the snowmobile there.
right, and there were a lot of different people that did those kinds of attachments, so to speak. We write about them. We write about the propelled ones, and then there's a chapter about how Henry Ford got involved with, and I don't even know if you're familiar with this, but there was a concept in transportation. It was called a screw propelled concept. And it goes back to Archimedes. he came up with the idea. And what it is, it's like a big screw attached to each side of a vehicle, and it digs its way through the snow.
Hmm.
As it turns, it will take along with it whatever it's attached to.
Right.
And we've got a chapter on how Henry Ford and the Fordson tractor utilized that for a few years, and how they had a ill-fated Alaskan mission with that. Fantastic story.
Oh, sweet. So is there a specific spot in the world where you could say this is where the snowmobile, as we know it today, originated?
Well, the snowmobile as we know it today, the place that claims to be the birth for it, when we talk about as we know it today, track in the back and so
Right.
forth, Sainer, Wisconsin, Carl Elison in the early 1920s invented what was called the power toboggan, but it utilized the track system. It had the engine mounted in the rear, all the things that later, and he produced 30 of them and then turned the production over to a company in Clintonville, Wisconsin, that made the four-wheel drive vehicles. And ultimately, they made about 30 of these things.
Hmm.
And at one point, the Army was using them in Alaska. The wildlife and fisheries were using them in the woods and so forth. And it really, as his patents began to expire, other snowmobile companies who were just starting to get into it saw the potential in what he had designed, and that really set the pattern for today's modern snowmobile. It
Right.
still has a big track in back, skis in front, but it sure goes a lot faster and it's a lot sleeker looking.
Yeah. Well, when I asked you where you think it originated, I didn't think you were going to say Florida.
No, Sainer, Wisconsin, which for people that follow snowmobiling, is about 20 miles from Eagle River, Wisconsin, which is the home of the World Championship snowmobile race.
Ah, there you go. Yeah. So, how long ago did Shipwrecked and Rescued? This is a brand new book, basically. The City of Bangor.
Right. We actually were able to release it last July,
Uh-huh.
and we released it at the museum where that one Chrysler is on display.
Okay.
And it was a great event. We had a lot of people turn out, uh, signed a lot of books, had media there, and it's interesting, Tom. I've had of the books I've done, I've never had a book where people who have read it have come up to me afterwards and said, "This should be a video. It's a complete story."
Hmm.
Somebody ought to do a video. Um, I don't have the capability or financially or intellectually to create a video.
You mean like a movie? Make a great movie,
It
actually. Yeah.
would. It
Yeah.
would. I did an interview the other day with a lady that said she had, like you, she had read the book. She said, "I've already got the segments figured out
Hmm.
for a, a video, a TV series."
Yeah. Right. Well, it's a great story, as I said, and you have a nose for a good story. That's for sure.
Well, I
So,
appreciate that.
what's your ETA on the snowmobiles book?
Well, it's going to, the Coca Cola book is like 200 and some pages,
Uh-huh.
and that took 2.5 years.
Wow.
Uh, this one will, again, because of what I'm finding, is going to be a lot thicker than the shipwreck book, but
Hmm.
I'm hoping to still get it out this year, and
Yeah.
I think we will. It's moving. I'm getting a lot of help.
Yeah.
I'm going to people that know something or know somebody that knows something. So it's starting to fall together. I'm already, I think, 12 chapters into it.
Okay.
It'll be out this year, but I had hoped for spring, and it's not going to make it for spring. But
But I hope you come back to the Gritty Hour when it does come out, so we
we'll
can,
definitely be back.
because I do love the way you write. And for those that are listening or watching, you might find Larry up in the Michigan or maybe Wisconsin area if you're going to go out there this summer.
Well, when it gets really warm down here on the bayous in Louisiana, I can think of a great place to go to cool off, and
There you
that's
go. Well,
Upper Michigan.
I'm thinking the folks in Copper Harbor or Calumet are aware of this book.
Oh, very much.
Yeah.
Uh, I have, in fact, I've already, some of the places, closed down for the winter.
Uh-huh.
And they're starting to open up again. And I'm getting, hey, we're going to need more books.
Yeah.
A lot of them have been sold up there.
Well,
And
that's great. Yeah.
people who visit, that area, it's a big tourist area in the
Yeah.
summer. And they see the book as a souvenir of where
Right.
they've been.
Well, I'll tell the folks that are listening or watching is what I was going to say. If you're ready to click that add to cart button or go to, was it Shipwrecked and Rescued, www.shipwreckedandrescued.com,
That's it.
to purchase the book. I could tell you, you're not only going to love Larry's writing, he tells a great story, but the photography, the photos that are in the book are outstanding. And then the research you did for it is exhaustive, I know, and it's just a great book to read. So
Thank you, Tom. I
we
appreciate
appreciate you having the time to come back to the Gritty Hour, and we look forward to seeing you when the snowmobile book comes out.
it. We'll do it. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you, Larry, and thanks for joining us, folks.